Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. We're jumping into some Runestrike tonight. And we're talking about the new patch. And we're going to be talking about a couple things that were added in this patch as prepping for future releases. So we're going to jump right into it. So, hey Luminar, what's good? How you doing? Like I was saying, there's a new patch in the world of Runestrike, and it actually staged a few different things. Notably, it staged the next season, which if you haven't seen it already, you can check out the article I wrote, putting the command into chat right now. You can head over to rtchompgg.com and you'll see the pinned post about the spoiler that I had, which we're not going to go over all of the releases, all of the spoils, because I want to wait for them to actually end up in client to talk about them. But part of this patch was getting things prepped so that way it will go live, because we're going to be getting the end of the season, rolling into the new season very soon. In fact, it's going to be in about 2 days. So by the time this recording ends up on YouTube, it will already be live. And we'll, of course, be tackling the discussion for all those new cards, because some of them are pretty powerful, and I'm pretty excited to try them out. But we have a few things to discuss before we even get that far. So let's take a look over here. We're going to try and tackle this in a similar vein to how I had done the previous breakdown for the patches. And hopefully this isn't washing me out too much, because I'm going to have chat popped out here. I can see what chat's saying. And then we're going to pull up the spreadsheet side by side so that way I can see which cards we're talking about. So we're just going to go card by card, talk a little bit about it, and see what my initial impressions are, because there are some pretty substantial changes. And again, this is the second half of a much larger patch. We got the first half that corrected a lot of the numbers, but these are changes that would require text box related things. So that's why it was, I don't want to say delayed, but I guess it was delayed. It's the easiest way to put it, that we're getting it now in this patch that just dropped earlier this week. So first one up is Avenging Angel. Now, Avenging Angel has been on people's radar for a while. It's been something that has commonly been pointed to as a card that is quote-unquote OP, overpowered to strong, ranging from broken to whatever. A lot of people felt it was too strong. I think it was verging on it, and I've mentioned this before in the context of other cards. I really think that the neutral cards should not be very powerful, or at least they should be worse than comparable realm options. I think it's okay to have powerful neutral cards, but the problem is that you lose deck building decisions when every deck could run this. So it may, because it has bury or whatever the effect of the card is, bury is just because the angel's up on screen. It may have certain synergies with certain things because of, well, it fits the theme of the deck. But it's uniquely and solely powerful enough on its own that it can stand alone, that it'll just show up in a lot of things because it represents such a sticky and powerful threat. So what happened? Well, we went from -4 health to -3. Ultimately, that's just a 2 health to damage reduction. It is health loss. That's why I'm being a little cautious about the wording. It is significant. It will matter. There's definitely going to be games that you would have won with the old Avenging Angel, but you won't win with the new one. For an 8-mana minion, it's tough to justify nerfing it too much. Now, I don't care about the rarity. I mean, the rarity matters if you were a legendary versus an epic, but if it's epic, rare, or common, I don't care. But ultimately, if your deck is featuring these, there are some challenges that your opponent's going to present or rather, challenges that you are going to present to your opponent, as a result of slamming this on the board. I think this is a positive change. If you went to -2 health, it probably still gets played. You would definitely maybe not definitely, but I think you would likely only see it in Morlich or other things that inherently had sack outlets so you could do it on demand, as compared to I'm just going to slam this big threat. But this represents a lot of damage. I don't know that the two or four, yeah, it's one on each. So you're losing, instead of 4 on this one, it's 3, and then it's another the second time around. For a second there, my brain twisted. I don't know if this is enough to push people away from it. I feel like this is fine. It's still going to get played, which I mentioned this in other changes. If you can state that about a card that, oh, it's getting nerfed and it's still going to get played, it probably justifies the nerf. So I'm okay with this one. Next up is Bone Giant. So the difference here is that it originally was each undead, so it saw itself and then got buffed, but now that buff is getting rolled in. That buff is getting rolled in because it was previously a 4/4, now it's a 5/5. So it's a 5/5 for 5 with a positive effect, but now it only sees the other undead. I guess this is fine. I wasn't playing Bone Giant before. I don't think very many decks are playing it now. I guess it's now more viable for actual soldier decks if you were Morlich, because you're obviously going to end up being Order. So maybe something there. I'm not really sure. I don't know what the impetus behind this change was. It's a little bit better for Rise of the Undead, maybe? Honestly, I don't know how that works with the Warcry and what it sees versus when the other undead come out. So if it can't see them, it's now a 5/5. But if it can see them, it was doing the same thing before. I don't know. I'm not real sure why this one happened. It's fine that it did. I still don't think I'm playing this card. It is something that I will say it's possible it shows up if undead become a thing, but so far from this upcoming season, Darkness Pervades, we are not... It's not undead themed, for the most part, so I think there might be one undead. I'd have to go back and look at the shadow cards that have been revealed to determine if there was one, but I don't expect that we're going to be seeing a lot of Bone Knight. You'll still see it, of course, out of undead decks, but that's fine. That was everyone. I'm just keepering it real, as in Keeper Lock still works. Well, of course it did, Doc. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. You can still make people regret playing the game by playing Keeper Lock. It is still a thing you can do. Alright, so next one up is Fallen Fairy. This is one that I alluded to in the previous patch breakdown, and I've mentioned many times on stream since. I was really, and still am really excited to play this card. Why? Aggro has typically been very, very bad in Runestrike. It's really not... My Angel got nerfed into still playable, as you just mentioned. Fair, Doc. Fair. Sorry, I had to call that one out from chat. Fallen Fairy is very exciting because previously it was basically unplayable. It was a 1/2 for 1. Now it's a 3/2. It does lose Veil. And it keeps the berry effect that a random Fae in your hand gets +1/+1. It's a little weird. Obviously, I want to try and build a Fae-based deck to try and leverage that ability. But to be honest, it's a 3/2 for 1. I don't care about the rest. The relevant thing here is, again, backstab and a number of 2 damage effects, because even Giant Scorpion just got buffed in the first half of this patch not too long ago. So there are a bunch of 2 damage effects that fly around that can eliminate this. But it's still a 3 power for 1. I think you have to respect it, and I think it's worth trying. If an actual Fae-focused build can materialize, even better. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will, because there just isn't a large quantity of Fae. But even if there aren't, as long as you have one, it's landing on something. So it's not pick a random card in your hand. If it's a Fae, give it +1/+1. It's going to look for the Fae in your hand if there's only one. So I'll take it. Tessa Fae aggro, Chaos has tools. I mean, Magus would be fine too. Now that we have a core of myth-based aggressive cards like this, the new buffed Scarab. These are useful, powerful, aggressive tools that'll allow you to pressure things, but at least in Fallen Fairy's case, they do fit the mold of your typical aggro minion where, yes, they are a threat. You do have to respect it because if you allow it to exist on the board, it will stack up damage pretty quickly. But realistically, it's not that difficult to remove. 2 damage is not a lot to ask. So you can just eliminate this thing if you build your deck to do it. And now that you have to respect aggro, this is going to cause, and you kind of did from the last patch, let's be real, soldiers is a thing. But now you have to adapt to these aggressive decks and build your deck. It can't just be Dirtle decks. It can't just be, all right, we're all going to wait and, 15 minutes, no rush, and then we'll all build battle cruisers and carriers. No, there are going to be people that are Zerg rushing you, and this is going to happen. So I really like this change. I think it's really cool. I'm looking forward to trying out Fae aggro. Next up is actually another Fae. So I need a little bit of water for this one. Mostly because I was already running my mouth. So, Frost Sprite. Yet another card that was basically unplayable. It was a 1/1 for 1 that gave an enemy minion -1 power when it died. Now it's a 2/2, which I think is the bare minimum you need out of a 1-drop in order for it to be playable. You need minimum 2 attack. Now it again only has 2 health, so it's susceptible to a huge amount of removal, but it's still curvable. So you can go this guy into a 2-drop, into a 3-drop, or this guy, and then next turn, another copy of Frostbite and another threat. And suddenly you have a sizable board that your opponent may or may not have a challenge actually addressing. Now, the berry is, for the most part, going to be irrelevant. I'm not a fan, given the way that Runestrike works, of the attack reduction effects. Now, this is random, but the challenge here, and Doc was pointing it out earlier, not in reference to this card, but just in general, being able to lock down your opponent's board, I think, should not be a viable archetype in Runestrike. However, there are a number of ways to do it, so you have to respect that those decks will exist. Is this going to make an appearance there? Probably not, because it's random. It could end up landing on the thing you've already reduced their attack to 0, so that's going to be a waste of your time. Plus, you don't really care about playing 2/2s for 1. But once in a blue moon, you're going to be able to get something that it's actually going to break combat in your favor. Keeper Lock Player says this will not be in the deck. I agree with you, Doc. I don't think it's going to make the cut. I'm just pointing it out because it is in that vein, and I think people will try it at some point. I don't think it's worth it, personally. But Frostbite is going to be relevant in those potential Fae aggro decks, or just in a nature-based aggro deck in general. Say Ogma may run this simply because you help fill out your early game curve. Because prior to this, what 1-drops were you playing? Probably 0, to be perfectly honest. But I think you could actually consider this. It's just going to depend on how the rest of the deck fills out. It does make you pause and think about it, though. It's not an auto-no. I think it's pretty close to an auto-no in Keeper, just because of the random. If it allowed you to, and there's no way for this to work this, well, it's not that there's no way, but because it could activate on your opponent's turn, it's not really reasonable because the game is not currently designed to allow you to make selections during your opponent's turn. That's why it's random. Like, that's realistically the reason. Now, it's entirely possible the development team wanted this to be random, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is more than likely random because of that reason. If there was a super fast aggro, it could be less random as my 1-drop. It just has no late game. Yeah, I can see that. All right, so after Frostbite, we're getting an update to Hercules. If you had to speed your own deck up somehow, this could certainly be viable. I absolutely agree, Luminar. I think that, talking about Frostbite, that it probably has a home. It probably has a home, or at least gets considered. It may end up on the cutting room floor. As my 1-drop, it would give -2 to one other thing on the board. True. Assuming you're fighting for board position, yes. and then it would allow you to potentially take back that board, depending on what it is. But right now, I think if there's a home for it, it's going to be in one of those more aggressive Fae builds. Or, I mean, other nature aggro, like we were saying. But for Hercules, moving on to the card that's actually on screen. So Hercules, it previously just killed a random enemy legend. Now it's going to banish it. How relevant is this? Well, to be honest, I do like the idea that there are more banish effects in the game. Hercules is a neutral card, and although I was saying earlier that I would prefer to see weaker neutrals in favor of stronger realm cards, having this sort of effect is fine, and it also baselines it, so maybe the whatever realm gets banish effects as, you know, their core identity or part of their core identity. It'll be a little bit cheaper, or it'll do it a little bit differently. Maybe it banishes anything that's over a certain cost, or I don't know. There's a variety of different things. So I'm fine with the new text edition. It's one of the very few ways to banish things entirely, which is notable. It can get around certain effects. It allows you to just ensure that your opponent's not reanimating things. That is, you know, the myth card, what is it, Mortal Exchange, that'll bring back Odins, it'll bring back other enormous enemies, that sort of thing. I think this is fine. I obviously don't have Hercules. Typically, I probably wouldn't even play him anyway. I mean, I don't think that the random is that bad here. Hey, Sportive, what's good? I don't think the random is that bad because you're probably just going to play this to try and nuke a specific thing. It can obviously come back to bite you because it's not as though it costs 5 so that you can, oh, they played whatever legendary, I'll immediately kill it. You have to wait a few turns, so it's entirely possible you're now in a coin flip or a 1 in 3 situation. If it gets beyond 1 in 3, you're probably losing anyway. Random is needed on this because of all the veiled legendaries. It's fine. I mean, one of the ones we're not going to get to, or we will get to, but we haven't gotten to yet, Lost Veil. Other than that, I mean, to be honest, I'm not even sure off the top of my head how many other legendaries have Veil. But I would imagine that other ones will down the line. So it being random is okay. I think you'd rather be able to target it every time, or just this thing needs to cost less. Like, realistically, Hercules probably should have the same effect, cost 5, and be like a 4/7 or you know, arbitrary stats. I just said 4/7, but like, pick a number of stats. If only there was a way to search for the number of minions with Veil. I mean, we could, but I'm not really that concerned about it. Like, this is fine. I think Hercules has too much against him right now to really be concerned with it. You know, like, if there's a major issue with Veil Legendary, sure, play Hercules. But I don't think he's ever crossed my mind to play him before, and I don't think this change is making me care about it now. Trophy Hunter is better. It comes out on turn 6 and just removes a 7 cost or higher. Yeah. I mean, Trophy Hunter could tag your own stuff, which is obviously the drawback, but clearly you'd be playing for a scenario where you engineer that it's only going to hit the thing you want. What even is the change? It now banishes things instead of actually removing it, Atona. Yeah, the banish, it's unique because there just aren't a lot of banish effects. That's kind of what it comes down to. So next up is Island Turtle. Unfortunately, our boy here, he got the nerf. So, it specifically calls it out. I hate this nerf. Yeah. No, this is one of the memes from the channel. It's no more free real estate. You can't just Island Turtle into Island Turtle into Island Turtle into Island Turtle. Now, honestly, I don't feel like this was necessary. My real estate! Honestly, I don't think this was necessary. Yes, it's absolutely obnoxious when your opponent plays multiple Island Turtles consecutively as a result of hitting them. In what way was Island Turtle getting Island Turtle an issue? It is kind of obnoxious, but I think this was a self-correcting issue. But this is something, and we're going to take a moment to talk about this, because this kind of and I'm going to have to maybe mark this to actually like put a separate chapter in the YouTube video for this. The Runestrike release model, I've said this before, I like it, but it does introduce, hi baby, the puppy came through, and now she's upset and she wants to go back upstairs because I noticed her. The Runestrike release model introduces weird wrinkles with things. So the problem here, invest in stocks, not real estate. We got all the memes. The problem here is that with the current Runestrike release model, it's not as though we're getting a huge influx of cards at any given point in time. Because if we did, you could just plop, 30 new Earthen in a 300 card set. That would probably be a lot, but we're just making up numbers here for funsies. Say 30 new Earthen got infused into the format. What are the odds that you're hitting an Island Turtle? At least 1 in 31, right? And we know there are other Earthen. Point is that it would just be a very rare or relatively rare circumstance to conjure an Island Turtle off the Island Turtle, thereby just overall reducing the odds. But I guess the team felt that this was problematic. It can be kind of silly where you can just gum up the board because it's a 2/6. You can reasonably expect that you're blocking something and in a lot of scenarios surviving, which is a rarity within Runestrike. And if you can just play 3-cost things that continue to conjure stuff for you because of the subsequent Island Turtles getting cost reduction, I can see where it becomes obnoxious. I don't know that this was absolutely necessary. And I'm curious, I know there are other cards that have these other caveats. They aren't spelled out on the card like this, which I wish they were. But, or at least I don't think all of them are. I could be wrong about that. But I'm curious how many other cards do something like this and then cannot find themselves. And how many of those scenarios matter, kind of thing. People will still play it probably fine. I agree, Luminar. Like, I don't think Island Turtle gets cut from decks because of this. It still does what you wanted. I wasn't playing Island Turtle for the most part to get other Island Turtles. It just so happened that in a lot of cases, that was an acceptable play. So, bottom line is, I'm not happy about this, but I don't think this is a bad change, is kind of where it comes down to. So next one up is our good boy. The puppy here gets a buff, which is cool. So all of you soldier fans out there can rejoice because your loyal puppies are here and they're probably here to stay. I was talking about this offline with Doc, and we were debating whether Mastodon is necessary in soldier decks. Now, I'm leaning towards you still probably want to run it because it's just another Blitz minion. In addition to Molosser, who I was running even pre-buff. But I think you absolutely, if you weren't running Molosser before, you want it now. It's a 3/3 with Blitz for 2, for the most part. Yes, it's entirely possible that it's just a 2/3 for 2, which is understated but acceptable. But if you can get the +1 attack and Blitz, you absolutely are going to take it. So I think this is going to become a staple in soldier decks if it wasn't already. This is another one where it's kind of the reverse of Island Turtle, where Island Turtle got nerfed and you'll still play it, so therefore the nerf is fine. I felt if you were playing soldiers, you wanted to be playing Molosser before, and now it's getting a buff. So it feels a little weird because it's in the, the other side of the coin. Yup, it's better now. We'll see more play. It absolutely should. It absolutely should. I'm really excited about this one, but I've been playing soldiers anyway. So, I mean, yeah. Thumbs up on this one. I'm not quite sure I understand why it was necessary, but I'm going to take it. So after that, we have Nemain. Now, Nemain is going back to the nerf bucket. We're pulling a nerf out here. So what changed? Well, you may have noticed that there's a missing keyword on there. Specifically, that keyword is stealth, which I think this is a positive change. No more chaos stealth. Yeah, I think this is a positive change. Stealth is a it's actually a very interesting keyword because of the way it interacts with everything, which sounds a little redundant, a little silly. But the fact that you get a guaranteed attack with whatever the thing is changes the way combat works, because you could still play it in front of something. It's just not going to do this stuff yet. Like your opponent can't interact with it yet. And as a result, I really like the way that stealth can change things. But the flip side of it is I don't really like stealth because your opponent's so limited in how they can deal with this. This is still, I agree with chat, this is still playable. This isn't Lost Ark yet. You're right, Midge. This is a funny looking Lost Ark. Her corrupting a minion is huge. Absolutely. And doing it twice, like, that is absolutely infuriating as the other player. And I think that the biggest challenge is coming out of decks that, you know, you're playing against Ramses and they Nemain. You're playing against Ogma and they Nemain. And it's just like, I can't touch this thing. And my stabilization is gone. I just can't, you know, because I played a big thing, I have no way to meaningfully interact with Nemain. Now, realistically, it's still a 5 health minion. They played it in front of something that is now corrupted. It's going to be a challenge for you to remove it, but now at least you have the option outside of a board clear, which may or may not have even dealt with it anyway, because you could twist her, and guess what? She's still sitting there. I totally played games in the past day where I assumed it had stealth and just went on to some other worse play for that turn. Yeah, that if you miss the change, that can be problematic, Doc. But yeah, I think this is a positive one. I think it's definitely, I mean, again, stating the obvious, there are going to be games that are going to change as a result of this, but I think this one is much more drastic than simply a +1 or -1 somewhere. Losing an entire keyword like this is very significant, but you're still going to play Nemain. Any deck that was playing Nemain before is going to continue playing it, and I would almost think that they would need to rework it in order for that to change. Because I don't care about her stats. She could be a 1/1 and it wouldn't matter. She could be a 0/1 and it wouldn't matter. I would still play this because the whole point is the corruption effect, especially in Chaos. The fact that it's not in Shadow is significant because it just gives it to a different set of builds. So, point is that Nemain's still going to be around. Still got to prepare for her, but now you have some other options. After Nemain, we have Solaredge Juggler, who actually got a few changes, or a couple changes. Notably, you're only getting 2 daggers instead of 3. Kind of a big deal. All those spell spam decks, which are dead for other reasons, but even future ones, are going to have reduced ability to abuse Solaredge Juggler. Now, personally, I would rather if, and I don't know if this is possible, that they just made these not spells. Just name it an artifact or a skill or, you know, a relic. I don't care. I think relics are already earmarked to be something else. But the point is I don't think that this should be a spell if we can help it. But I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that that's necessary. But, oh good, we've gotten to the one of the doctor caused this changes. Yeah, I mean, honestly, this one, as soon as we saw it, her ankle still broke. They didn't make that change. They did change some of the art, Tona. I didn't get to that yet, but that was an unexpected change. I don't think they mentioned that at all, but some of the artwork did change. Her ankle's still painful to look at, so I'm going to try and not look at that one for a moment. But, so we lose a dagger. Definitely relevant. Some of the art change is awesome. Absolutely. But whereas we lost Veil on a different minion, we're getting it here. You can't target her with her own daggers, which can matter, again, for in the future, generating, like getting the engine rolling, getting the combo moving so that way, if you need certain triggers, you need to just find one more card because of Realm Walker. Spoiler alert, something else changing there. It allows you to, or prevents you now from doing so. I think this is pretty cool. I kind of wish, like, this is now probably more in the vein of what the dev team was originally thinking. It's a early game minion to contest early game minions. They played the new and improved fairy on one. Well, I went first. I'm a Solaredge Juggler and blow it up. And that's just a 2-for-1, most like, well, maybe not a 2-for-1, but, you know, you potential 2-for-1, and you're advancing your board. I like Juggler in general. I still think it's kind of powerful. I still think this is going to get played. I'm hoping that we won't see more abuse with spell spam decks. That's kind of where it goes. So here we go. We're back with Petrified Egg. Why Petrified Egg? Because of Undead Crocodile. Undead Crocodile now has been changed. So it was previously a 4 for 2/3, or 2/3 for 4 with Blitz, Lethal, and Rally. This gets +2 power and loses 1 health. Now it's only gaining a power. This is another one that I don't quite understand. I can only assume that there were win rate statistics that showed that this needed to change. I don't really feel as though this was necessary. I think that you had to go through enough effort in order to just even get the crocodile. In order, I don't know. Feels bad for people that don't play removal. The thing is that +2 power and lethal is pretty swingy. Yes and no. I mean, you're cheating a turn by playing the egg. You can't get the crocodile any other way unless you can summon it off of Rise of the Undead. I don't know if you actually can. But you have to play a very vulnerable egg. Hypothetically, if you're Emrys, it's not that vulnerable because it could be a 0/4. But then you paid 2 blood and a card in order to get a 4/2 with Blitz. Okay? Just kill the damn thing. I don't know. Like, this, it's fine. Like, it's still likely going to kill most things at the stage in the game that you want to be playing it because of the lethal. It could easily be removed, but as we're aware, people seem to think removal is optional. But that's where I'm going with this argument, Doc, is that I think if you are walking into Runestrike now, unless we find that, okay, it doesn't matter that soldiers got buffed, that Fae got buffed, that this got buffed, that aggro is still unplayable. Unless that is true, and people still avoid playing removal because of that, they will absolutely get punished by those other decks, and then this would catch collateral damage by virtue of those other decks existing. Because you have to be playing Combust, you have to be playing Backstabs, you have to be playing all this other early game removal. That again, Backstab, for example, maybe won't work against Petrified Egg because they're going to Emrys and A2 it. But I think that the addition of, or more emphasis being put on early game removal is going to cause a lot more squished, scrambled, or fried Petrified Eggs. Regardless, we ended up getting this nerf to Undead Crocodile, and I think this is fine. If you're playing it right now, are you no longer going to be playing Petrified Egg? Maybe. I don't really have room in this for most decks anyway. Like, maybe Earthen decks, if you were an actual Earthen deck, want this as, you know, just an extra Earthen. But in that case, you don't, I mean, you care about the Undead Crocodile, but you don't care as much. I don't know. I get it on one hand, and on the other hand, I don't care about this card enough to say nerf it. I could probably list 20 other cards before I'd even remember this card existed, let alone then choose it to be nerfed. But like I said, I assume that there's some sort of win rate metric that was propping up. I think nerfing Crocodile makes no sense. That's kind of where I'm at. But I don't know. I wasn't going to play Petrified Egg anyway, so at least not right now. I have played it before, don't get me wrong. But all right, so next one up is one of the divine cards. So we actually just got these relatively recently, and this is getting nerfed. Why is this getting nerfed? Or how is this getting nerfed? So it costs 4, but instead of it being your entire board, it now is going to be conal, like the new Desperate Charge. Second nerf for it? Exactly. Exactly. So this is the text box nerf as opposed to the cost nerf. And I think it's warranted. I think you can set up some bonkers stuff with this, but ultimately I don't know how much of a nerf it is. So yes, it's clearly worse where you're only getting maximum 3 minions versus 5. And it could cause some wonkiness with your positioning. But I think in the sense that if you're playing Emrys, and then you play the 5 cost 2/7 thing that heals your other guys, you're just going to play stuff next to it. Like, you can just choose to play in a different spot, and I don't think it's going to hinder you that much for the most part. Like, if you land aura on a specific thing, say a raptor, or, insert other highly threatening minion that now is virtually invulnerable because you're going to be healing it with, say, an Emrys A2, or buffing its health, really, plus buffing it with the aura, and then healing or dealing damage to your opponent, or you're going to Virility Witch and do all the above and blah, blah, blah. I think it's good that this was getting nerfed. I don't know that how much of a difference it's going to make realistically. It's going to depend on whether now aggro decks that spread out wide across the board cause you to miss buffing a minion that you would have previously and then lose the race as a result of it. So instead of you being able to play in 1 and 5 because your opponent's played minions in 1 and 5 and you need to block to try and stabilize a little bit, now you have to play in, say, 4 and 5, and the minion in row or lane 1 is now going uncontested, at least for an additional turn or 2. Certainly by a minion that is not getting hit with the aura. Does that damage translate into a win for your opponent, whereas previously it would not? Possibly. Regardless, I anticipate auras still going to exist. The cost nerf, of course, pushes it later in the game, so you can't just go, I set up a minion on 4, then I play on 5, minion plus aura. Or turn 6, turn 7, whatever. Everything's getting pushed 1 turn later, so the combinations of minion plus aura shrink, which is absolutely relevant. Like, that matters because it forces the aura player to not be able to set up what is arguably a soft lock against a lot of opponents earlier in the game. They have to wait until later. They can't play it as safely. Either they have to expose the minion, which could then die, or they have to wait till later in the game, which gives these early game decks more time to pressure. So I think this is definitely good. I think this makes sense. We've absolutely seen the power of Aura of Might up to this point. Next one. So next one up is By Light's Grace. This one was a less complex nerf, but not necessarily less meaningful. And that is, it goes from a gain of 4 blood to a gain of 3 blood. Absolutely important. It doesn't cause, like, there are going to be blood abilities that you can't just immediately get. So, for example, say you expended all of your blood as Brienne. You gain 1 at the start of your turn. You play this and gain 4, and bang, you have your A3 again. Which is, and we've mentioned this before, and I do plan on doing a blood ability tier list at some point. Brienne's A3 is arguably broken. Like, it is absolutely insane. So By Light's Grace effectively generating another one, not quite for free, but giving you another A3 is busted. So, in this case, I think this is positive. Honestly, I could see leaving this at 4. I think that it's fine that Light's thing is blood generation, and I think that then you just cost all of the blood abilities for Light champions, and any Light abilities that interact with blood slightly higher unless you want them to be pushing the power curve. It's only a one of in the deck because it's a legendary. Now, I don't like the general idea of, oh, well, it's a legendary, so it gets more power. But there is an argument that since it's only a singular effect, and right now we have very few ways to bring this back, as in to play Light's Grace a second time in a game, I'm kind of okay with that. I generally like the idea of, oh, it's a legendary, so it's super powerful, but you only get to do this once a game. So to be honest, if a lot of legendaries banish themselves on use, I'd probably be okay with that. So that way, and maybe have a clause that they can't be duplicated or something. Look, you get to do this one cool thing, and that's it. So at 4 blood, I was kind of fine with it. Going to 3 blood, I still think you play this. It's going to be a little more challenging because, just like the Brienne example that I was using earlier, now it's not quite hitting the break points that you had previously. It's just not going to be as quick. But it's still a large, infusion of blood at a singular time. It's not an accrual process like the rally effects. So, Light's Grace is still playable. For something's telling, like, I want to say that you have to consider this more as to whether you'll even run it, but I don't think that that's actually true. I think you're just going to slam it in every light deck regardless. So, Light's Grace. All right, next one up is Entangle. Entangle got a buff where it previously used to do 1 damage, now it does 2. This is a pretty significant change given that we're seeing much more relevant early game, and I anticipate this card will see a lot more play because it may actually just straight up remove something. Whereas before, I kind of feel as though it was relegated to, well, I'll entangle something that my opponent tried to block my guy with, and then I'll hope that combat plus the stun and follow-up combat eliminate it. Now, it A, gives you a removal that you can play on 2. If you go first, or even if you go second, you can mana orb it out and nuke their turn 1 play and just remove it, like those 3 2s for 2, gone. Obviously, it now will eliminate more things that are damaged or set things up to be eliminated because it's doing more. The stun was always relevant. Like, I actually like this. Like, I think this is playable as it is now. It's really going to depend on how many X2s actually show up, but I think this is a relevant benchmarking where early game removal is okay if it does 2 damage, and then it's going to be that dance between how many X3s or better can you fit in the early game that may or may not have drawbacks, versus how many X2s are you willing to run that you have to cross your fingers that your opponent doesn't just remove immediately, and trying to weigh those options within the meta. And I think those present interesting deck building decision points so that you can actually, and on the flip side, what are you trying to contest? Well, the Fey aggro deck has a lot of X2s, so I'm going to run Entangle because I can eliminate their guy early on and stabilize. Okay, well, they're actually playing demons, and demons have thicker bodies, and that's presenting different issues. All right, I'm going to leave Entangle at home. These are the kind of decisions that come up as you have these evolving metas in other games, and we'll probably start to see in Runestrike more now. So I do like the change to Entangle, even though, I like my aggro stuff too. So we're actually back to Solaredge Juggler. Why? Because of Ethereal Dagger. So I didn't call this out earlier, but Ethereal Dagger got changed from being able to target anything to now only being able to target enemy minions. Again, this is primarily pointed at, or I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that this is primarily pointed at trying to deal with all of these combo-y decks that are utilizing this card and others in a fashion beyond what they were intended. Now, personally, I would prefer if basically all the removal and burn could target anything in the game. so that way these like lane lock builds were less of a thing and less of a potential thing, because then you could play a Solaredge Juggler and nuke your own thing just to clear it off the board. But obviously that's not the intent here, and it seems like those decks are an intended metagame contender. Either way, Ethereal Dagger's getting changed a little bit. This is fine. Like, this is reasonable to... I think the worse evil are the engine combo decks than the lane lock builds, personally. My Sailor opponent currently has a 0-2 Solaredge on the board. Well, funny story. Old Solaredge, he might be able to do something about that. No longer. All right, what's the next one? I don't even know what was changed for this. Ah, okay. So Grave Bond got a buff. Grave Bond got a buff. Grave Bond went from getting a skeleton to an armored skeleton. So the skeletons are only 2/1s, but armored skeletons are essentially 3/2s. They're 3/1s, but they get an armor. There's very few things that... is there even anything that would go through the armor and not kill it if it was a 3/2? Like, I don't think there's anything that... Well, I take that back. There are a couple effects, like the new fungoid and some other things that are lose 1 health. So it's not quite a 3/2. There is a little bit of... I don't want to say a drawback, but a problem there for it. But regardless, this is okay, but I don't think I'm playing card. I don't think I'm bothering with this. I didn't have room for it in the deck before, and I imagine I'm still not going to now, because I would imagine that anybody who's going for Grave Bond really just wanted a body to be there. Having a better body is, of course, better, but I don't think that it... Like, I don't care about Armored Skeleton that much. I don't think it's going to matter. Entangle now kills it as opposed to giving a turn to put a thing in front of it? Yes, which is generally going to be better. Of course, there are times where you'd rather lock your opponent up, but I think I'd rather remove stuff more often. So next up is Mana Rot. Mana Rot went from causing your opponent's runes to cost 1 more to now being 2 more. This is actually pretty significant. 1 more is an annoyance. 2 more is actually actively detrimental, because with 1 more, it's still possible your opponent can play 2 things in a turn. It's just, you know, they're obviously going to be underdropped a little bit. It's going to be a little clunky. But in this case, now that they cost 2 more, you're requiring 4 more mana for 2 cards, 6 more mana for 3 cards. It's going to be enormously difficult for your opponent to play things. And it's entirely possible they won't be able to play anything at all, because it jumps them up the curve so much, or pushes their costs up the curve so much. A lot of people have rightfully pointed out that Zekon, or Zekon, however you pronounce it, A1, the torture effect, or I forget what the card's actually called, but putting it in their hand and making it now cost 3, especially if you can get multiples in there, is a thing. But the problem is that how often are you going to get more than 1 in their hand? And even if you do, it's still like, okay, they take 2. Whatever. Like, it's fine, but it's not... I think Mana Rot's going to have a better time in decks that where you're applying pressure and then you push their board sweepers out farther. So you're slamming a bunch of minions against a nature deck. They would all die to a twister. Bam. You're going first. You land Mana Rot on 6. Now they can't play the twister until the follow-up turn. You're pushing a bunch of damage. They may not even be able to play anything to contest your existing board. Or they just have to play in a really awkward fashion, and it just buys you another turn of damage. I think that's where it's going to see more usage rather than the Archaos Shadow Champion. I'm sure that A1 list will exist. People will try it, but I'm not sure how valuable it is. I think the blood in Zekon is much more valuable for A2 and A3 than A1, even in a dedicated A1 build, at least right now. I can see this being a Soldier Morlich deck as it gets later in the game when things come online. Yeah, I could definitely... That's what I'm talking about, Beard. I agree with you. I think that something like that could materialize. Or even if you're playing I'm not saying don't play this in Zcon. You could play this in Zcon in, like, say, the aggro demon shell, and then just, this is a disruption tool to delay your opponent. Just imagine if you had a buffed up, through whatever means, Nightshade on the board, and then you mana rot and your opponent can't remove it now. That's an enormous addition of damage that's being represented because you stalled them for a turn. It's, again, just the philosophy of Fire of you're against the clock as much as your opponent, because at a certain point in time, that's when your opponent's deck, as a control deck or slower one in general, comes online, and Mana Rot buys you that time. I saw the Zcon make it cost 3 play, still won. Yeah, I could see that, Doc. Yeah, but that isn't a thing. I agree with you, Tona. Best case for Mana Rot in theory is make an opponent not combo. I mean, as a combo disruption, yes, also. It's only really going to be, unless we saw, so in order to make the Zcon A1 idea work, you need a number of effects that allow you to either reset the A1 or put more in their hand. And then, oh, they have 6 of them suddenly, you Mana Rot them. But engineering that scenario is very difficult, and even if you do, it may not even be good. Because yes, they're going to take a bunch of damage, but then, okay, well, they'll take a turn and dump them all, like, or you invested so many resources that you're not doing anything of value. I think just the delaying tactic of this is going to be way more important, and it could be pretty decent there. I think 2 is, I mean, it's twice as much as 1, but it's going to have way more of an impact than a single mana increase. Exactly, helps aggro close a game and the board sweepers come on. Like, yeah, exactly, Beard. I'm with you there. But yeah, I like the change to Mana Rot. I don't know if this were a thing. Like, if Mana Rot were a commonly played card and it was a good card, I imagine a lot of people would be enormously frustrated by it, to the level of discard effects and counter spells, which have been removed from a lot of modern games because people have found them so frustrating over the years. They used to be way more common in card games. And then they basically, resource destruction, discard, and counter spells have mostly gone the way of the dodo in modern games. There are limited ways to do certain things, and some of it is related to the challenges of creating an asymmetric game, such as the style of Runestrike, as opposed to one where you can interact on your opponent's turn, like WoW, TCG, or Magic. But in this case, I don't know. It's interesting that this is getting a buff, I guess, is the bottom line. You got 6 in their hand. That means your opponent somehow spent 12 blood or copy cards in their hands, and then you windmill slam your Mana Rot for whopping 6 damage instead of just playing a good card. Well, the other thing is that it stalls your opponent. So in this scenario, if you somehow got all of them in there, A, the damage continues to accrue. They can't possibly remove them all in that turn. At most, they could get rid of half. So it's pushing damage. It's potentially disrupting their draws. You know, there are relevant factors to it, but I don't know how you even get that to happen, let alone continue to do other relevant things while making that happen. Which I understand just kind of underscores your point, Atona, but I just don't think there's cards there for it right now. People are going to try. It'll probably win some games, but I don't think it's going to be consistent. This is now a decent, hey, let's keep you from board sweeping another turn while my dudes hit face. Exactly. I mean, the old one did that too. The old one, just by pushing it a turn, like, it's not a permanent, like, it's not a permanent increase. So pushing a Desert Twister from 6 to 7 or 6 to 8 is irrelevant on turn 6. Like, it doesn't matter because they can't play it on turn 6. That's all that matters. So the old Mana Rot does the same thing. It's just the turns that it's still relevant will matter. So now on turn 7, if for whatever reason you didn't Mana Rot then, you could Mana Rot now, or you could back-to-back Mana Rot. Those are things that are relevant. I don't know how much that's going to matter, but it also does it on turn 6 and 7. Exactly, yeah. That's exactly it. So we're back to Mana Rotting on 6 and 7. I don't know how else you would do it. I don't know if there's going to be room for that card, to be honest. It's obviously better, but I don't know how much better. Morlich Soldiers can matter. Yeah, that's what Beard was saying. I don't know if Morlich Soldiers is better than Magus, but We'll figure that out later. So next up is Pixie Dust. This used to just give a friendly minion flight. It now gets +1 attack and flight. So just flight was a debuff, to be perfectly honest. I think this needs to have draw a card on it, and then the only time it would ever be used is in combo decks. I just don't think this card will ever get played. It needs to be like +3 attack, in all seriousness. And I don't know, I mean, I might play it at +3 attack. I don't know. I'm not sure here. Well, I'm sure I'm not playing it now. I'm just not sure exactly what it would need in order to make me want to play it. But I think it would need an enormous attack buff and probably draw a card or something else, because giving it flight seems bad. If this was evade, I could play it, +1 and evade, maybe. I think there's a spell that costs 1 that gives something evade already, but a buff and something that protects it as opposed to a buff and something that hurts it. Now, granted, you could make the argument with the buffs to aggro that this allows you to continue pushing damage because, oh, my opponent slammed the blocker. All right, well, I'll give it flight and get through. But then your guy's just going to die. It just doesn't seem worth it. I don't know. I still don't want this card, and I don't think I ever will. I suppose if you give him a speed minion that has a large butt flight, I mean, Pixie Dust on a dinosaur would be funny, but they're still going to, like, say you Pixie Dust a raptor, they're still going to spend as much effort as they humanly can to remove it. So you just got 2 for 1, and I don't know that the +1 matters that much. It's an extra 2 damage each time they attack, but I don't know. I don't think it's worth it. But next up is Torment. And Torment now, I think it gets banished. Yeah, it banishes when you cast. The reason this happened is because people were apparently, pulling this back, either Darlock A2 or whatever, and playing it again, and then your opponent having suffer 6 is kind of bonkers. It's doing, like, you're doing the Faith thing better than Faith. Torment A2, Torment. Yep, exactly, Luminar. Honestly, I think I don't think this fixes any of the complaints about the card. I think the complaints about the card is the inevitability. And the fact that this is probably... I obviously don't own the card. I've only played against it a handful of times, and I both won against it and lost against it, with a variety of different builds in both scenarios. And I would imagine that this is, if not an auto win against other control decks, a very powerful option, because your clock is now, like, you have an uncontestable clock against other slow decks. You're on a timer like when, yeah, exactly. Imagine if Faith had a card that, like, I don't know what Monastic Devotion's options are all off the top of my head. I know one is +10 health and, like, get some blood, I think. And I think there's an attack one, but I don't think it's +3 attack. It's a key to Keeper Lock working. I'm losing to Morlich because I didn't draw it. Well, yes, but in Keeper Lock, you're not playing this again. So, like, the change that it's banished doesn't affect Keeper Lock at all. My point is that I think that this is the issue people have with the card. Yes, getting it replayed after somebody Darlock A2 to Torment a second time is a problem. Yes, it probably should have the banish thing. But I don't think that that really addresses... I think the suffer would have to get reduced in order for people to, like, or to address the underlying complaints for it. It's really close to being a triple conditioning. I mean, it is a triple conditioning. For 3 less mana and 2 less cards. Now, granted, you have half as many copies as conditioning in your deck, but you can't naturally get 3 conditionings. You have to jump through hoops to do it. Now, granted, this is again this is one of those that's, well, it's a legendary card. You only get this effect once a game, which is why I like the banish condition on here. And I mentioned this before when we were talking about Hercules. I think that this should be on more cards. I think that legendaries should be cool and powerful and game-changing and like, man, I really want that card. But the balancing factor is, no, you get to do it once a game. And then assume, from a development standpoint, that players are going to play all of their once-a-game effects once a game. As opposed to, because the deck sizes are just too small to say, well, maybe they'll never see it. I don't like that balancing methodology regardless, but I know plenty of games that do that. And I don't think that that's a good one. But here, that isn't even really possible because with only 24 cards in your deck, it's pretty likely you're going to find your one-ofs at some point. It's just a matter of when. Obviously, Torment is worse the later in the game it goes on. But at the same time, it's not really, because you're adding almost an entire extra champion attack every turn. I kind of feel like this needs to go to Suffer too. And I think it would still get played at that. I don't know. This is absolutely good, this change. But I think it's probably going to need further nerfs or we're going to anticipate a lot more people complaining about it. So those are the card changes. Well, the card changes we're going to... Yeah, you know what? We'll switch. We'll talk about the other changes first. Let me find them. Gotta pull those up. Ignore shields as well. Yep, there's a lot of things about it that are a big deal. Okay, so let's talk about the other card changes before we go circle back and do the champion changes. So, the other card changes are a new keyword. So, there are a number of cards that have the new keyword Surge. Enchantress, Spellblade, Spellslinger, Storm Fury Mage, Realm Walker, Hedge Witch, Witch Doctor, and Voodoo Priest. Now, they did get a couple of other changes. So it looks like, were these in this patch? I'm going to one of them. So this is now a 2/4. Witch Doctor's a 1/6. Spellslinger is now a 4/5. It was a 3/5, I believe. And Storm Fury Mage now has 3 attack, which I don't remember what its previous one was. The main reason I'm lumping all these together is because the primary change for this is Surge, and I just kind of don't want to go through all of them. So we're just going to talk about all of them as one big thing. What is Surge? Well, we can get this to pop up. Whoop. Game. There we go. Surge, whenever you cast a spell, trigger an ability. In this case, it'll be deal 2 damage to a random enemy once a turn. So all of the loops that we've seen over the last several months, get them out of here. They're not happening because you're only going to get this activation once a turn. Now, if you have 2 of them, obviously it's going to trigger each of them once. But you're not going to be seeing Storm Fury Mage just lighting things up for a gazillion damage because they loop a bunch of spells. Surge equals GG combo, at least spell-based combo, for now. Obviously, there could be other engines, but this is more in line with the sort of changes that I would like to see for these sort of things. You have to decide, as the developers, are we going to allow engines, and therefore combo decks, or we're not? And you have to be very careful about which cards are allowed to be an engine and under what circumstances. Because these sort of cards are bad. And to be honest, a lot of them that got Surge, they're bad. And we can pull some of them up as examples. This is an okay body, and the ability is fine. Like, it's mediocre. Honestly, I think the Myth one, that's now a 4/5 for 4, that direct damages your opponent, I will consider playing that in Myth-based aggro. Because you're going to have spells, it's some extra face damage, it's a decent enough, sizable body that you can play it. Storm Fury Mage, you could argue, could help you control the board, but realistically, you can't rely on it. It'll go face when you want it to hit the board, and it'll go board when you want it to hit face, or it'll go to the wrong part of the board when you want it to hit certain things. Lol, random. Oh yeah, mages are now a tough sell as a tribal deck. I mean, it's possible mages are a thing. It's something to look into because they now have this help. And if you were to play, like, I think you said it earlier, Doc, like Tessa aggro could be a thing because you have Stormfairy Mage, you have Spellslinger, you have now the base of the early myth stuff. But we're digressing a little bit because we're getting away from Surge. We'll circle back to that. The big thing here, I think most people, and why the comment came up about killing combo, is this. So you don't have a card draw engine that is now just going to refill you while you're comboing out. That cripples these combo decks, which I think should be, painfully obvious to anybody, but just to put it out there, this is just crushing to these combo decks. Like, even if the Enchantress had her changes, and, a bunch of the other ones did, the card draw is the important part. You need fuel to continue looping things, and you have to find a way to generate the mana. But there are multiple ways to attack that, either through cost reduction or mana generation or other effects, depending on whether the spells are cheap enough or whatever. But you need more cards. You can't loop a combo with, like, 2 cards the way this game is structured. Maybe you will in the future, but for right now, Realm Walker was a key component. This probably should have gotten a body buff as well, because I think that if you were going to limit it to 1 a turn, and this is where we start talking about how these cards are now bad, and it ties back to my earlier comments about you have to decide, are they going to be allowed to be engines, or are they intended to be fair cards? If they're intended to be fair cards, which to me, Surge says yes, you're supposed to play this in Mage Tribal, or just as something to help you sustain through or preemptively prepare for board clears. That means that this needs to actually be a body worth playing. And right now, it probably has to draw 2 cards as it is now before it's worth it, because the body is so anemic. And I don't think, because the body is so anemic, that it will ever draw 2 cards. Playing a fair 2-3 for 3 is not a good deal. Exactly, Atona. That's why I think this needed to be a 3-4. It could be a 5-1 for all I care. I mean, that would probably be really good in Runestrike because of the way combat works, but it at least makes it vulnerable, and it's a threat. So there are a number of different ways that I think that this could work. In its current iteration, I think this is bad. Similarly, Spellblade, this one, I mean, I can kind of see how it wants to work, but if you're playing spells, that means you're not going to be advancing your board, and I just struggle to see this thing growing to large enough proportions. Now, notably, it does buff the back end, so it's entirely possible that maybe you grow this past the point where your opponent can reasonably remove it, and then they have to jump through so many hoops that they can't contend with this and the rest of your board. But I think that requires at least 3 spells played. And if that means you went turn 2 this thing, turn 3 spell, turn 4 spell, turn 5 spell, I think you still lose that game, because your opponent eventually just goes, okay, single target, remove that, and you suddenly have nothing. So I don't know. There's a number of these that I think, well, several of them are still bad, but I think the Surge mechanic is absolutely good. And I think that these cards, in a lot of cases, can be fixed by back-end server ones as opposed to this sort of change that we're seeing now. So the difference between this patch and the previous patch is that we have text box changes here, which require a different development cycle. Whereas the previous patch was just adjusting cost and then attack and health. If you just adjust these 3 numbers that are in, the icon areas here, that can be changed in a different way. It requires a less extensive dev cycle, and they can probably just modify the numbers and go, okay, this thing is good, bad, or otherwise. You'll be seeing some stat changes in the future for sure. Exactly, Luminar. I'm 100% with you there. That if this were, and this one is very dangerous, to be honest. This one is very dangerous. I would only want to see attack increases on this. Increasing the back end on this could be very, very dangerous, especially with the way Runestrike combat works. I know we keep saying that, but you can't just throw bodies at it to whittle it down to a low enough number that, okay, I can get it now. It will forever eat the thing in front of it unless it's big enough to survive and punch back, which presumably all of your spells are ensuring that it can't. So I would honestly, out of all of them, this is one of the ones that I would want to see a text change to, because it should. I'm a little concerned about it growing health. That's the big thing. But as it is right now, I'm not real threatened by this. Maybe that'll change, but one that could get weird is this. I just don't know how you would do it, because this means that your guys now are sort of snowballing, but given that it's once a turn, honestly, this probably doesn't matter. I can see this as a 2-cost 2/4, then go back to +1/+0 again. Yeah, that could probably make sense. Maybe a 1/5, but that, and then only +1/+0. That might be too strong for Spellblade, but there's definitely some room to play around with the stats, and that's basically where it goes. For the other ones, Hedge Witch, Enchantress, Realm Walker, Witch Doctor, Voodoo Priest, I don't care. They're not going to get played. I mean, Voodoo Priest does get, or has gotten, a few different buffs. You know, it costs less, it's a more impressive body. But the problem is, I don't know, again, with making them lose blood, since it's cheaper than it was before, now you have the potential to go Voodoo Priest into a spell and disrupt your opponent, but it's... The windows for Voodoo Priest to be relevant are very narrow, and then they open wide again as soon as they remove the Voodoo Priest, which doesn't take a whole lot of effort. It's definitely better, and blood disruption, as I mentioned before, is a thing that I'd like to see explored more, but we'll see. It's on your opponent's spell. No, this one's... I think that's what got me the last time, because I misread it. This is when you play it. At least with Surge. Yeah. So that's what I was saying. You could slam it and then immediately follow up with a spell to try and screw with your opponent. But it's still weird disruption. Like, it's not enough. At 2 blood, it might be too good, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Regardless, I think the 2 ones that you're going to care about are Spell Slinger and Storm Fury Mage. Spell Slinger probably is the major one. I think the others, like we were saying, kind of come down to just stat increases. If they get relevant stats, and then it's just like any other minion. Oh, you have good stats and a good ability? Yeah, I'll probably play you. Shocker, I know. All right, so that's all of the card changes. Let me get out of this to make sure. Yep, those are all of the card changes. There were some fixes for visual effects and things, but we also wanted to talk about some champion changes, which are very, very relevant. So, first one up is Sakara, her A3, Curse of Apophis. So, it still has the same effect. You're going to be presented with 3 options. You're going to choose one of them. However, the difference here is as it says in the notes, remove as a train choice, delete it. I don't know exactly which ones got removed offhand, because it doesn't note it here in what I'm looking at. But there are now less options. Now, that sounds like it should be a nerf. There are now less options for you to choose. But in this case, it is a significant buff, because realistically, you only care about 1, maybe 2 of the effects of these. One of them is -2/-2 to your opponent's board for 4 blood. Anybody remember when Dawn's was 4 blood? I think the Veil option got removed. I think you're right, Luminar. I think that's the one that went away. So there were, 5? So now there's 4? If that's accurate, assuming that, and chat can correct me, if it was 6, obviously it goes to 5. I think there was only 1 remove. 6 to 5, that's possible, but you have the -2/-2 and then suffer 2 for roughly the same effect. Point is just that you have a greater chance of seeing something that immediately impacts the board, and for 4 blood, 2 across the board is pretty solid. You can definitely engineer a bunch of scenarios that are valuable for that. We actually, on a previous stream, were playing a A3 Sakara focus build that was doing halfway decent, and that was with us whiffing finding the appropriate abilities off of Curse of Apophis. So getting a buff here is kind of a big deal. So I'm very much looking forward to this and trying it out. I'm a little concerned to see how it works out, to see if it's too strong, but we'll see. I'm still of the opinion that, including her A1, a lot of blood abilities should get increased in cost, but I'm anxious to try this one out. All right, so next one up is Ogma. -2/-2, suffer 2, bury for 2 damage, stun, and upkeep. Okay, so yeah, it is 5. Unless they removed one of those. So next up is Ogma. Ogma's A3 got changed. So previously it was +3 attack and frenzy this attacks again. Now it still retains the frenzy attack again, which honestly is the part that's concerning. Since A1 already gives trample, you can't, like, the redundancy on the trample was not going to happen. Just from a design standpoint, I think they want to avoid that sort of thing. So it's tough to determine what they could get, but I think that frenzy attack again should not be there personally. But they did reduce it to +1 attack, which is significant. There are a lot of times where you needed exactly +3 to be able to plow through a blocker and then push face damage. Even if it doesn't, it just, in general, you're going to be pushing less damage. Even if you're still killing the thing, it's 2 less damage to face plus whatever that adds up over time. So this is a pretty relevant nerf. I think realistically it would be better if the frenzy attack again was reworked, or even just remove the plus attack at all, which may sound weird coming from me as somebody who's a proponent of aggro, but realistically, most Ogma decks are not actually aggro. They're effectively mid-range burn decks that are just, oh, well, I'll play Mindless Raider, now it has 7 attack, kill just about anything, and then punch your face. Oh, you played something? Punch the face. You're going to try and punch the face. That's just what happens. And that's the bottom line. So this is definitely good that this is happening. I just think something slightly different probably should have happened. You see 3 of 5, 2 that matter. That means there are 12 combinations of cards, and 1 is a miss. 11 out of 12 chance to get what you want from Sakara. And in that 1 in 12 chance of whiff on a -2, you still get a stun. Yep. Exactly, Atona. The A3 is now really good. I mean, it was pretty good before on Sakara. I know we're going backwards a little bit, but I liked it a lot before. I just, like the thing about Sakara, just go back to her for a second. A1 is just so good that you had to have something super strong to justify not just, okay, I'm going to give something blitz every 3 turns. All right. Last change, and then we'll talk about overall patch thoughts. And then maybe a little preview about stuff. So, Salen's A3 got changed. Game. Unfortunately, it's not going to tell us, because I don't think you can see this unless you are in a game. Like, it doesn't show you what Firestorm and Sandstorm is. So you're going to have to, everybody out there, live with me explaining it. So previously, Sandstorm was Occupy, minions have evade, and Strike, minions your opponent controls lose -1 power. Now, it's they lose -1 power for 1 turn. Now, notably, this can still stack with other enchanted slots. So if you have somehow all the boards and all the slots enchanted, they'll get -5 when their whole board attacks. If that scenario happens, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you were losing anyway. Sorry. You were probably not winning that game. Or something so bizarre happened that, like, I don't even want to know. That game sounds miserable, is what I'm saying. But honestly, I didn't mind these decks. as much as, like, I think Keeper Lock is more offensive than Salen, personally. Is Salen better? Maybe. I think Salen's, in general, a better... Well, maybe, I don't know if it's necessarily straight up a better champion or even realm combination, but it's certainly very strong, and it's absolutely very frustrating to play against, and I am not opposed to the archetype being nerfed. I don't know how much it's going to make a difference. Like, you can't lock people down, but I don't, as easily anyway. But I don't think that the Salen decks were necessarily locking down and board filling. Like, they could do that to you, but it feels like Keeper Lock was and is much more hell-bent on actually filling up all your lanes and preventing you from playing any more minions. Salen, conversely, felt like it was just, I'm going to pressure you because, I mean, the realm combination supports that game plan, and you can't effectively remove my stuff. I think what really needed to happen here was losing the evade. Like, the evade is part of the problem because your opponent, because of the realm combination, has a plethora of blitz minions who are going to hit the board, immediately decrease your attack, thereby allowing them to pull farther ahead in the race or potentially lock down your board, whatever. And then now those things are protected, even if you have your own blitz minions. It kind of necessitated an out-of-hand answer, which now if you had a board, they enchant a slot, put a blitz minion in there, get in. They reduce your attack. You will come back online, but they are likely to just play something again in that same lane. So yes, you're going to push more damage to them. And in thinking about games where I lost to Salen, I think I probably would have won if I had done an extra 5 damage over the course of the game, which this would allow to happen. So it might just be a number of inches, a game of inches, in that you can push enough damage against these decks as they are. Honestly, I think it's not worth screwing around with these things. Similar to the whole engine discussion, there are certain effects in this game and games in general that I think you're just playing with fire when you have them exist. It's just going to be, well, even if this deck is not good now, there will be a meta that comes around where all of a sudden, because of this particular card that just got released, now this thing is busted and the play pattern is inherently not fun. Now, that is one of those very vague statements that we always debate about on stream. But there are certain things like Keeper Lock and similarly, Fun Police Salen that being unable to play your cards because they've locked down your entire board is not fun. Locking your opponent out of the game or spending 15 minutes doing your combo or the animations take so long that it literally takes up your opponent's turn. Guess what? Those are not fun as the other player. That isn't the Salen or combo deck or Keeper Lock deck player's problem. It's not their problem that you have fun. It's the developer's problem that you're not having fun. That's why I think that you're just dancing a little too close to the bonfire here. Games aren't for fun? True. I know it's a joke, but like, if you listen to people who play games, you would think they never have any fun, ever. Show up in it doesn't have to be a card game. It doesn't have to be Runestrike. It doesn't have to be anything related to card games. Show up in any Discord, any forum, any stream of any game, and I'm confident there will be a number of people, as long as you have, more than one person or the streamer talking to themselves kind of thing, you are going to have a number of people that are losing their minds over the dumbest things. And it's like, guys, for God's sake, this is supposed to be fun. Like, come on. Look, there are definitely problems in games where, the balance is bad or whatever happens. I know we're digressing a lot. It applies to Runestrike, but it's not directly Runestrike. It's just general gaming stuff. But, like, come on. at a certain point, it's just a game. Like, let's get over it. Yeah, that would be the definition of irony, Tona. That irony can be pretty ironic. So, brief digression aside, brief by Random's Thoughts standard digression. Overall patch thoughts. I think this is a valuable patch. I think there were a lot of things that were addressed. I think a lot of community complaints have been resolved, either by nerfs, by buffs, by whatever. I think that there's a lot of future proofing that was done, aka the new surge mechanic. I think there's a lot of cool things that happened in this patch, and I'm very excited to see what's coming down the pipe. And again, I mentioned it earlier, but if you head over to the website, my website, rtchompgg.com, and you can see my preview for the upcoming Darkness Pervade season, which, again, by the time this gets up on YouTube, the season's probably already going to be live. But there's a lot of exciting things that are coming down the pipe. I'm looking forward to a bunch of the cards, the new mechanics, and I think there's a positive outlook for Runestrike going forward. There's also, it was introduced in this patch, as prismatic runes, which I'm not going to do it for this part of the YouTube video. I'm just going to open them afterwards, but we got a few packs to open, see if we get any of the cool new prismatic stuff, because they do look pretty sweet. But overall, I have to give this patch a thumbs up. I do think there's a number of head scratchers in there. Like, I honestly just don't get it. But these are the things where it's just a leap of faith. You have to assume that the dev team is doing things as a seed. They're doing it now for the future stuff. So we'll see how it goes. But that'll do it for this time. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And Black Lives Matter.